Hello, everybody. I am John O'Loughlin. Welcome to McDuff Lives, and happy Monday and happy December 2nd. Happy December, everybody. And looks like winter is here for real. It's been freezing around here. And well, Monday morning is a good day to open a new topic. And while Adam Finnegan and I have done maybe 25 or more shows together by now, I think to specifically focus on the Lyme disease question of where did Lyme disease come from, uh, has come back into my mind because of Adam's recent interview with Eric Hunley. That's Hunley, which I really recommend folks to watch. It's a great introduction to the whole question of where did Lyme disease come from and Adam's research and what he's finding. I want to develop from there today. I want to enhance my own understanding of what's the connection between Erich Traub and Lyme disease that we have everywhere today. This horrible, horrible, debilitating disease. So it's a very important topic, and so we've got somebody, Eric, Adam Finnegan here, who has studied it for 8 years, I guess, by now, Adam. And I think you are the man. You are the expert to answer these questions. So once again, thank you for coming to McDuff Lives, and welcome.
Thank you, John. Great to be here.
So I want to start in your book where I think I started to get the message. It's in chapter 6, Building the Bioweapons, part 1. Erich Traub learns the esoteric art of germ weapons with Carl Beller. And just down to the third paragraph, it says, Traub mentions diseases of blood-sucking insects being able to reactivate vaccine viruses. That is a live vaccine virus. It can potentially regain virulence when a mosquito bite transmits African horse sickness to the vaccine recipient, as African horse sickness contains antigens that can be suppressive to the immune system, reactivating the vaccine virus and the ability to spread. This is very much like what he did with the foreign protein in his mice to awaken the sleeping LCM virus to start up an epidemic from scratch. Now, what I maybe haven't really taken in as seriously as I have over the weekend as I've studied this and gotten back and forth with you was that this process is the strategic bioweapon process. So that Erich Traub knew that these sleeper agents that he is creating are strategic bioweapons, as you have defined it. And therefore, when we look at Lyme disease through the perspective of your study, we see the conclusion that we're stating in our caption today: Lyme disease is a strategic bioweapon. So that's a pretty big headline. Where would you like to start to explain this to people that perhaps haven't read your book yet, but are very interested, as many people are, in where did Lyme disease come from?
Yes. So Lyme disease, it's from, he is basically trying to detonate a storm from within and reactivate many dormant viruses within the body by using that spirochete that sheds these nasty immunosuppressive proteins, and it also goes to the brain. Spirochetes like to go to the brain, and therefore it almost mimics his intercerebral inoculations in mice that he did with LCM virus. So for those unaware, his early discoveries of this disease condition of chronic immunosuppression or immune paralysis, which has been coined immune tolerance, he discovered it by injecting foreign antigen into the brains of mice directly. They were called intracerebral inoculations. But since you can't go around inoculating people, intracerebrally, what better way than to use a spirochete that will carry those proteins directly to the brain? And so when he did that, he reactivated a dormant virus, which became known as LCM virus, lymphocytic choriomeningitis virus, and it started this multi-generational infection that suppressed the immune system and then brought forth neurological disorders and cancers and chronic disease. So strategic bioweapon is a good term. I mean, for Lyme disease it has all of his signature all over it. I mean, the way that Lyme disease brings on this disease in many people is basically the same. It mirrors that same condition that he studied with LCM virus.
So just to clarify, what you've been describing is not the source of Lyme disease, but the source of the strategic bioweapon strategy to reactivate viruses that are dormant by using, in this case, the spirochetes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, the spirochete itself almost becomes like a secondary infection in relation to the viral storm that sweeps through the body when the immune system is in disarray, when the immune system is suppressed. Like it's more of the chronic systemic health complaints than the actual spirochete is, even though the spirochete is, it's still doing harm. It goes to the brain, it goes to the lymph nodes, and but much more devious is how it's turning the body against itself and doing that with the reactivation of latent viruses, usually in those in the herpes virus family, like Epstein-Barr virus, which most people have in latent form, herpes simplex, cytomegalovirus. There are other ones, and it basically turns the body against itself.
Now, in regard to tracing specifically where does the Lyme disease come from, it comes from a specific source that you've identified in your study, and that is, if I understand it, it is a Borrelia anserina.
Mm-hmm.
So
yes.
Tell us the story about how Borrelia anserina came to be studied and then converted into a bioweapon, and who did it and when did he do it?
Right. And so one thing I can say is, by looking at this too, the Lyme disease spirochete, whoever put this together understood a lot of diverse animals and their immune systems and the art of adaptation. It had to have been a veterinarian, somebody with a lot of skill in the art of adaptation, which Erich Traub had. Because a lot of people think Bergdorfer is responsible, but he really doesn't have even, a quarter of the expertise in animal disease that Erich Traub had. He didn't really understand all of these complexities and adapting them to all these different animals and such, because the Lyme disease spirochete pretty much now infects. It can infect just about anything. And Borrelia anserina was typically only seen in birds. So Borrelia anserina is like, you could call it bird Lyme disease, right? And basically Erich Traub, we have him in possession of this spirochete through his student, Werner Schaefer, who brought the spirochete back to Traub at the Institute. And we have this in 1939.
And the institute, as folks are not maybe not know, that is the Rockefeller Institute.
Well, no. This was
Huh?
University of Gießen
Oh, in Germany.
because he started it in Germany first. Then he later brought it to America after he was sent to America through paperclip. He like in the Rockefeller Institute, he was just able to make that discovery of immune tolerance and start studying this whole process, which then became his life work. And it wasn't until he went back to Germany in 1938 where he starts to get all of his expertise in the tick-borne diseases, and under that man Karl Beller at the University of Gießen. So that year, 1939, he becomes assistant professor to Karl Beller, and Beller taught him all about like the animal rickettsia, the rickettsiosis of animals. And the rickettsia is like we said, it's a type of bacteria that is often transmitted through insects, and typhus is part of this group. Rocky Mountain spotted fever, among others. And he also learned how a mix or a cocktail of these infections all rolled into one tick could produce a very complex disease in dogs that mirrored his immune tolerance. And so we have him and all of these complex infections that were listed in that paper that Karl Beller published that year with Traub under him was all of the same co-infections that would later show up in Lyme disease, in the black-legged tick that transmits Lyme disease. All he really did was switch out this certain parasite with a spirochete. And it was this, so we have him the same year with that avian spirochete, that bird spirochete. And that's when he gets drafted into the military.
And let's be clear, this is the Nazi era, and he's had to join the Nazi party by now, and his wife is apparently a very fervent Nazi. So let's be clear as to who he's working for.
Yeah, and so he under the Nazi party, they started a really sophisticated bioweapons program. It was just very well hidden. But he gets drafted. So in 1939, he's getting all this expertise with the tick-borne diseases. Also, the following year, 1940, he weaponizes the Serratia marcescens bacteria, which is the bacteria that would later be used in open-air simulant tests, where they sprayed this bacteria all over San Francisco. It ended up killing one person, and then a bunch of resistant infections followed.
Now, was that after the war?
Yeah, this was I believe that was 1950.
So by then he's over here supposedly working for the United States government.
Yeah, but so in 1940, I have proof of him weaponizing that bacteria that he would later advise the U.S. government to use in simulant tests in the 1950s. So 1940, and then in 41 and 42, he's drafted into military service up in France, but they pull him from the front lines and tell him, we're going to put you somewhere else where you can study animal disease instead of being on the front lines because you're valuable, And he goes to work with Karl Beller on that infectious catarrh or mixed infections of horses, studies that, and then he studies the AIDS of horses, equine infectious anemia virus, during that time. And then he goes to Insel Reims in 1942. And he's studying the avian influenzas as well at that time. But it looks as though So he has this avian spirochete and he starts weaponizing it, but it was like done in several developments. So he would update it, right, and then update it again, producing another, a newer strain of it. Then when he got to America, he updated it again. And that's the reason why you have these different forms of Lyme disease. So, because, okay, they consider three types of Borrelia able to cause Lyme disease, and that is Borrelia afzelii, Borrelia guerinii, and then Borrelia burgdorferi. And basically, these all came from this parent strain, Borrelia anserina, right? All of these other ones are just weaponized versions of Borrelia anserina. Some are more updated than others, right?
All right. Yeah. Maybe let me just type so I understand that the Borrelia anserina was weaponized first by Erich Traub under Karl Beller in Gießen in Germany.
Yes. Yeah.
And
then
so
to
they
insulin.
developed it as a biological weapon for the German government during wartime.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And then there was refinements, or what people might today call gain of function processes.
Yeah, and a lot of it also had to do with adaptation. Like he was also trying to adapt it to as many animals as he could. So he would use viruses of cattle, along with the spirochete, to adapt it to cattle. It was a certain method he had, and so he would do that. He would start adapting it. He'd adapt it to, because right as it was, the avian spirochete didn't really, it only affected birds, and so he's like, oh well, how can we get this to now infect cattle? How can we get this to infect mice? How can we get this to infect deer? All of that. And so he started to adapt the spirochete, and it also brought it, he wanted to make it more stealth though, because Borrelia anserina was highly fatal in birds, but he wanted to make it less fatal and more, devious to the central nervous system, and in creating a strategic bioweapon, right? Because they're a lot more successful in the long term. The ones that are highly fatal, they burn out really quick, and they're very noticeable, so they're very containable and trackable. But with this, he wanted to obliterate all that. And then what he did was adding that whole mix of cocktails, or that whole cocktail of mixed infections that he had learned about that year: Bartonella, babesiosis, rickettsia, different rickettsia, and the Borrelia. Those were all of the things he learned that year. And those are all the same things that show up later in the black-legged tick and other ticks in America. Now keep in mind too. So it looks like he produces one strain. Then I think he probably produced another strain when Russia captured Insulrems, and then, like Joseph Stalin put it under his personal protection. He understood how important that facility was. And so he was testing it over Eastern Europe and everything. And it looks like when they took Insulrems, they started testing it on the Germans. Like they wanted to start using it against like West Germany. So it looks like that's what happens, and that's why you have several. So these other strains, Borrelia afzelii and Borrelia guerinii, are far more common in Germany and in Europe. Okay, so it was over in Germany first. That's the thing.
Can I just stop for a second, because
Yes.
I just want to think about the political situation at the time, and
Hmm.
why would Joseph Stalin want to do this? And of course, that answer to that is the history we've been studying here for many years here at Macduff Lives, and that is that the wartime partnership between the United States and the Soviet Union came to a screeching halt at
Hmm.
the end of the war, and our State Department and our Defense Department and Harry Truman, the next president, were all set for the Cold War, and better dead than red was the watchword. So the West had declared a Cold War against the Soviet Union and against communism generally. So, having just fought their way through the Second World War, Joseph Stalin was betrayed, and that, I think, provides some motivation to do bad things to the West. I just wanted to put that little historical note in there, and I think, well, anyway, that's my comment.
Right. And also, I guess we can also keep in mind some of the stuff that had been going on since World War One, where they thought the Spanish influenza was a British biological weapon, and they were very distrustful of both the United States and Britain. And I tend to wonder how much Britain was also probably fueling some of this in the eyes of the Soviet Union, because they seem to be very, divide and conquer is their strategy. Just like in the World War One events where they tried to blame us for foot and mouth disease, Britain infecting ships going to Germany with cattle, and then getting them to think that we attacked them with foot and mouth disease. And I wonder how much Britain was doing as far as, this antagonism, probably to try to get to turn the Soviet Union against America. I wonder, that's a good thing. I haven't really taken a look at those particular angles, but I wonder.
Well, I just
So,
say my studies of those particular angles support 100% what you said, and that I think is the truth that the American people need to look into, is that there are forces in this American government that were not satisfied with peace after World War II, and they wanted to continue to conquer more parts of the world, and Stalin was on their hit list, and
mhm,
it to me, the idea that our government was then willing to uh, use the power of our army and our incredible economy to destroy the Soviet Union is obvious, and that the Soviet Union then uh, very well stoked up by the British. The more we study about the Cambridge Five and that spy ring, the more your theory becomes absolutely clear. Talk a little bit about the Cambridge spy ring's involvement in this drama.
right. So, this will bring us right back to where we left off about how, where, the Russia captured Insul Reams. They started interrogating them all. I believe they tripped Erich Traub up, and were blackmailing him with more crimes, because Insul Reams did have forced labor and they were working. Traub and Schaefer were working on a human/avian influenza vaccine, and they were likely testing it and using the incinerator to dispose of human bodies. And so, um, Donald McLean, he is very instrumental in many of the activities surrounding the biological warfare programs of America and the United States and Canada, and the whole tripartite agreement that started. Well, Donald McLean, whose handler was Kim Philby, Donald McLean helped to arrange Erich Traub. So he helped to arranging the so-called phony escape, or this so-called escape that was a phony escape for Erich Traub to get over to West Germany. And basically, the Soviet Union knew the whole thing. They were involved in it. They were letting him escape because they wanted to send him over to America as a saboteur. And so they got him over. He's, with the help of British intelligence, they arranged his escape. He went over to West Germany, and then he is signed up for work in the United States through the paperclip program. And Donald McLean was also facilitating testing activities even before Traub was over there. He was helping to set up testing activities at Plum Island, probably as far back as 1944, all the way to 1947. Then he left to go to Cairo, at the British Embassy in Cairo, where that was an important station because the University of Cairo and Namru 3, the naval, the Navy medical unit that was going around collecting all of the different ticks and insects that could be used in a program, was right there. And so,
can I just put a little historical point in there too? Is that the Namru 3 was one of the Navy labs for searching for pathogens all over the world, and it went into action in the early 50s. Thomas Milton Rivers of the Rockefeller Institute was one of the leaders of that institute. This is where they go out and they find Buna and a lot of other stuff in the South Pacific. It is all begun in the Rockefeller Institute. The Navy came into Rockefeller Institute and built their NAMRU out of the facilities right there. So I just think it's so important to think that, this is a Navy project. Okay, that's great. I mean, Uncle Sam can study this stuff and we love it, but what is the real interest behind it? And that's what I think we need to consider. As every time I turn around, I see the Rockefeller Institute or some other connection. So I didn't want to let that pass by. Sorry to interrupt you.
No, that's cool. So he gets over to paperclip with the help of Donald McLean. And also he may have brought strains of the spirochete from Erich Traub, which he got from Erich Traub, over to the United States even before Erich Traub arrived for paperclip and had some of these things tested. But then when he gets over here, he starts producing better strains, and that's another probable reason why we have several circulating strains here. Different types of Borrelia burgdorferi. We don't really have the Afzelii and Guerinii. But it seems that lends a lot of it backs up what I'm saying completely. And so here's another thing, is that the black-legged tick, the main tick that's responsible for spreading Lyme disease, all the way up to 1951, they were saying that it has absolutely no human diseases. It spreads no human diseases. And that was the reason why they began producing them en masse and using them.
And using them for what?
Using them for simulant tests. So these simulant tests, simulation, they call it simulant because it's a simulation test of, where they will take a so-called harmless bacterium and they will spread them out in open areas. That's one type. But then the other type of simulant test is infecting insects with these so-called harmless simulant bacteria. And you release the insects and you see how they spread out. And in his case, he was using, it was like a combination of birds and ticks. It was like a bird tick program. We released the ticks on shorebirds, and then watch, you follow the bird migration patterns to see how far you can get it to spread out. And that's why he was traveling between Colombia in South America and New York and the northeastern United States. He was doing that in parallel with the bird migration patterns.
So just to be clear now, he is now conducting these simulant tests for the United States government, running this out of Plum Island?
Plum Island, and there were other areas. I know he was over, he was in Bethesda, Maryland, but he was also set up at the another USDA facility in Maryland.
There's one up in Beltsville. It's
Beltsville. That's the one.
Yeah, it's a
Beltsville.
big farm.
Yes.
Wow.
Beltsville. So he was
not
there.
far from where I live.
Yeah, he was there, and then he was also, and he was listed as a supervisory bacteriologist. And we know he was at Plum Island working there, first because the congressional hearing that was set up in the congressional hearing that happened in 1948, where they were talking about, it was, where we can set up a foot and mouth disease lab. Well, they talked about him specifically. They didn't mention his name specifically, but they referenced him, and there's absolutely no other. It was him, because they were talking about, is our guy back in the Russian zone now? They're like, yeah, he came here and applied, but he's now back in the Russian zone. And that was Erich Traub. And the second thing is he listed it was an application to visit the United States after he had been sent back in 1952 or 1953. I think it was, yeah. And so he listed, they wanted him to fill out to list his employment, and he put the U.S. Department of Agriculture ARS station in Greenport, Long Island. Greenport, Long Island is another name for Plum Island. The Greenport, Long Island station is another name for the Plum Island Animal Disease Center.
Okay.
And he put for the, because it asked something about the reason for his appointment at that job. He listed that congressional hearing law. Public law, I think it's like 496 or I can't remember the exact number it was, but it was a public law. And it was that public law, that was the hearing they had in 1948, where they referenced him. So that shows they were planning on putting him there the entire time. And another thing we have, in 1950, he takes a trip to Washington, D.C., for a conference, right? And he lists for his contact. He said, if in case someone needs to get a hold of me, I can be contacted through BT Sims, I believe he put, of the USDA. And it was somebody who was also involved with Plum Island work from the USDA. And then another thing we have is in the Michael Carroll book, Lab 257, we have the Plum Island source who relays that he saw a picture of Erich Traub on Plum Island, where he was pointing to where he released the ticks for these tests, right?
This business about this simulant test is so sus, if you will. Did they do simulant tests before Erich Traub came to the United States, via the Cambridge spy ring, or was this something that science usually did, or is this a brainstorm of Traub's to cover the release of a pathogen that would ultimately debilitate millions of Americans?
Yeah, so the Germans are actually the ones. The Germans, the, the
Sorry.
Germans are the ones who started it.
Toto.
The
Sorry.
Germans are the ones who started it in 1933 and 34. They were actually doing it covertly in London and Paris through the subway systems, and they were using that bacteria, Serratia marcescens. Now, the Americans, I believe they probably did do some of these, and I know they may have been doing them before Erich Traub was sent back here because of him advising Donald McLean, and Donald McLean then setting up stuff in America to be done, you know. And Erich Traub, but when Erich Traub got back here in paperclip, then he really was able to get these testing these bacteria and things rolling, and he was listed as that supervisory bacteriologist. That's why, because he was overseeing a lot of these tests. And we know that he had, we know that they were using Serratia marcescens after he got back here. I don't know if they were doing that before, but they started using that bacteria that he had weaponized in 1940. And
Now,
I think that
when you say Serratia marcescens has been weaponized, what is the difference between that and the Anserina, the Borrelia anserina, in terms of are these weaponized into the same disease, or are these two different things?
Well, they will produce a similar disease, right?
Okay, so the Serratia marcescens can also produce a disease that might be considered to be Lyme disease.
Yeah, and I mean, there's also some subtle differences, and I know that Serratia marcescens has a tendency to cause these severe urinary tract infections. So there's differences, but generally, you know, they would bring on a similar immune tolerance outcome.
Mm-hmm.
There was also some fatal instances of this where that guy died, and you know, there have been fatal instances of Lyme disease too. It's just most of the people will get the slow chronic disease because of HLA, which, you know, the susceptibility because of the genetic makeup of the immune system.
Mm-hmm.
And so, like, the Serratia marcescens had been known to very rarely cause severe infections, but generally they looked at it as safe. But it seems something changed when they started, you know, spraying this all over the place. There were definitely some serious problems that were resulting, and it was like, you know, the hospital in San Francisco had never seen this infection before with this bacteria, and there were just tons of people overwhelming the hospital, and they were very resistant infections, meaning antibiotics were not working.
Mm.
And it kind of goes into, it looks like Erich Traub was imparting the antibiotic resistance. He weaponized it with this pox virus called bovine papillary stomatitis virus. And it looks like he was able to transfer antibiotic resistance to these, as it became very resistant to antibiotics. And it's actually interesting because Erich Traub's son, Walter Traub, he spent his life studying these simulant bacteria and the properties of antibiotic resistance.
And that sounds to me like MRSA and this
Yeah,
horrible, you know, multiple
he studied. Erich Traub's son got heavily into studying all of the simulant bacteria, and I believe Staphylococcus was another, but his thing was antibiotic resistant. Walter Traub.
Okay. Well, let's go back to where we were in terms of the source of the Lyme disease that you were telling us. Okay, so now you've identified, or at least you've got an account from Michael Carroll's book, Lab 257, that Traub said here's where I released the ticks. Let's go on from.
It was a photo of him pointing to where he released the ticks. And then, we have also John Loftus and his source, who are also saying, yes, this is, the high level biodefense source saying, yep, this occurred because of these activities. Erich Traub and Plum Island, and, carried these infected ticks all up and down the eastern seaboard. And they were also doing some experiments with planes, dropping them out of planes. They were doing different things, because they would also they were doing tests with feather bombs as well to spread Newcastle disease. Erich Traub was also advising that. So and then, but the thing is so this black-legged tick, the main tick that spreads the Lyme disease, they started using that on a large scale because they were, their idea was, okay, this tick has no human diseases, so it makes for a good tick to use to do these large simulant tests, right? We don't have to worry about them infecting people. And so Erich Traub starts inoculating these ticks with he was, because of the nature of immune tolerance and how it doesn't produce an immediate or outwardly noticeable disease, Erich Traub could say, see, these don't cause disease. He could infect something and say, see, these don't cause disease. And he was also telling them, it will leave a bullseye rash, but it's harmless. Okay. And that's what the Nazis were doing. According to Loftus, what Loftus told me, what he saw in the classified files was that the Nazis were also tracking this by the bullseye rash. And so he was telling them, it'll leave a bullseye rash, but it's harmless. And because of the nature of immune tolerance, he could show them, he could make it look like it didn't cause disease, especially if he was doing it in animals, if he was putting it in animals. And
so you can tell, he could tell people like generals in the army or secretaries of defense or anybody else, say, oh, look, when you see this bullseye, just means that, this is one of those blackleg tick things. It's harmless. So, don't worry about it. And we can actually track the spread by reports of people with these bullseyes. So it's
right.
I don't know. It's still invasive of the victims, of the humans that get the bullseye, whether they get sick or not. I think it's highly illegal to do that.
Right, but keep in mind they then went to pass laws to allow that in 1972. But the thing was, it wasn't illegal to them at the time because they used an emergency powers clause, where in times of war and national emergency, they can do many things that you couldn't otherwise do.
Yeah. And
that was one of the things. So then, that's why later on, they're like, we got to make a law to make it so that it's legal, so we can do this when we're not in wartime. And so that whole thing came about. But so Erich Traub, he's going back and forth to Columbia and New York and New England and Maryland. And so in Polly Murray's book, Polly Murray was one of the first Lyme cases that became widely known. She wrote a memoir about getting Lyme disease and all of the struggles she had to endure. Like, at one time they put her in a psychiatric ward because they told her she was imagining disease. Had a really rough life, but, she lists the start. She said she got really sick in the summer of 1956. Right, the summer of 1956. I believe it was while she was in Cape Cod. I think, but it was the summer of 1956. And then for the first time I could find, it might have been sooner, but I found in 1958 newspaper article saying that the black-legged tick, which they had maintained spreads no human diseases all the way to 1951 that I can find, is saying that it's a serious transmitter of human disease. So in that time frame, you have this quick, all of a sudden it's now this serious spreader of disease, and not one disease but many diseases, because then in in the next decade you see all of these cases of babesiosis, you see all of these cases of Lyme disease, you see all of these cases of rickettsial disease, and it's like, okay, what a coincidence. They're all the same diseases that Erich Traub learned about in 1939 with the tick-borne diseases. All of those co-infections of Lyme disease are the same exact things he learned about the year that he grabbed that avian spirochete, Borrelia anserina, and how convenient that, or what a coincidence that spirochete, Borrelia burgdorferi, is the closest match to Borrelia anserina.
How possible is it that Erich Traub, when he's standing there on Plum Island releasing these ticks, thinks that it really is a harmless simulant? Is that possible?
That he thinks that, or the government?
I don't think.
I don't think.
But is it possible that he was innocent?
No, I don't think so. Like, he knew all about these mechanisms with immune tolerance, because that became his life work, and that's what he was doing with some of his other weapons. Like when he weaponized foot and mouth disease, what he was doing was trying to get it so that it no longer caused these blisters on the hoofs and mouths, but instead integrated and became a central nervous system disease so that there were no outward symptoms. And because of his extensive studies in the LCM virus and immune tolerance, he really understood this. And so it would be like the most genius way to fool the Americans right under their noses and get them to attack themselves with these harmful simulants. And he has all the expertise. It's got all of his signature all over it. Because he was already noting the central nervous system disease that ensues with immune tolerance. He was noting the cancer that skyrockets with immune tolerance. So he was well aware of this stuff. The Americans, on the other hand, just didn't seem to get it. But and then we have the fact that he was interrogated by Dan Benjamin, John Loftus's friend, who was in the CIC, Counterintelligence Corps. And then he trips him up in a lie, and he says that, yeah, I was flipped to the KGB. So, and then keep in mind that day X that Alexander Kuzminov was talking about, that day X where a large-scale bioterrorism campaign against the West, right? And they talked about
using... If I recall, that was back in 1949. Is that right? Am I remembering that right?
He didn't say what he didn't say when that occurred, but he said he talked about it, and I was saying, yeah, this seems to have occurred just after World War II, because they did start this large scale bioterrorism campaign, and we pretty much know this because of the USDA conferences in 1953. and in the 50s that were talking about this as though it was an active war that was going on, that was actively happening. And now that there's a USDA conference that becomes very important in proving the Lyme disease situation too, because okay, this was an entire conference about biological warfare in the poultry industry. And what happened, they were one of Erich Traub's contacts. He was a Pentagon guy named what was his name? It was Todd, Frank Todd, okay, Pentagon guy. And he's talking about biological warfare on the poultry industry, and he basically says he basically talks about exactly what happened. He says this. He says, it must be remembered that in addition to this normal peacetime menace, there is the current biological warfare threat dealing with the possibility of the deliberate introduction and spread of disease. The willful introduction of disease into this country can cause many problems. An enemy can select the host, disease, time, and place. He can also distribute unusually large numbers of organisms and pests, like insects, utilize more effective methods of dissemination, as well as unusual ports of entry. An enemy can increase the problem by using several agents of similar diseases simultaneously. The combining of disease agents of different types might produce more than one disease in an individual host with contradictory symptoms and varying incubation periods. Such combinations might even act synergistically to make others more effective. Unfortunately, there are a number of animal diseases, native and foreign, benign and highly fatal, that present similar symptoms, all of which increase diagnostic problems. It is important that we keep this in mind. The presence or the suspected presence of one of these diseases may be thought of as only a common endemic disease may in reality be masking a more serious foreign animal disease. And he says, I believe that records indicate that several foreign poultry diseases have gained entrance into this country by the importation of undeclared laboratory cultures, smuggled birds, and from importing insect vectors in birds during the carrier stage or incubation period. We also know that raw garbage, contaminated feeds, and veterinary biologics, vaccines, have been factors in spreading disease in this country. And he talks, enemy airplanes could try to spread disease to farm animals and poultry by using bombs or spray tanks modified to create clouds of the infectious agent over limited targets or blanket large areas. Aircraft and balloons could launch similar attacks using a wide variety of devices. More likely, however, attacks against farm animals would be carried out by secret acts of sabotage. Sabotage would certainly be conducted at livestock, poultry, and poultry concentration centers such as stockyards, railroad terminals, sales barns, hatcheries, biological plants, feed production plants, mixing establishments. It is conceivable that a clever saboteur might use biological products as a means of spreading destructive diseases to this country's poultry populations. So, and now in this conference, this is another huge piece of evidence. In this conference, they list avian spiroketosis, which is Borrelia and as one of the agents of one of this agent, they call it agents of special significance, which is like a watchword for biological warfare agents. Okay.
And that's Frank Todd of the Pentagon, and do you have a date on that? What he's writing there?
1953. It's a poultry conference.
Okay.
And that's available publicly. I printed it out, but I can send you the link. But there's this poultry conference is entirely about biological warfare, and many of the people who attend were people from Plum Island. M.S. Shahan, the first director of Plum Island, was there. Several other guys that were from Plum Island were there. Frank Todd was there. Many people who were associated with Erich Traub were there. And so it occurs right after they send Erich Traub back to West Germany. And they're talking about, several records indicate that, yes, foreign animal diseases have gained entrance into the country. And because it's about biological warfare, it's like almost it's a subtle admission that, yeah, we are being attacked by biological warfare and through the poultry industry. But what they don't really say is that, well, the attacks on the poultry industry, these may attack the poultry industry, but they're intended for human targets too, because these have been adapted to humans.
Wow. And that's in 1953, and the Pentagon is knowing it. And, we look at what's going on today and question people like Dr. Fauci and these people who have been at the top of the pinnacle at the NIH and NIAID, the real national experts. They have access to this information. They could tell us, they could tell the doctors and the physicians of our country that, hey, we have this bioweapon. It's in our bodies. It's in our forests. It's all over the place. And so don't deny it. Let's get to work and deal with it. The system just doesn't want to admit it, do they?
Yeah. And another thing is that what this whole timeline kind of shows is that Bergdorfer was not the one responsible for this also. Like, I think that's kind of a big point to make. I think they kind of put it on him as like the fall guy later on, because, when they wanted to deflect all of this away from Traub, because they don't want people looking into Traub, because when you look into Traub, it's like a doorway to so many things. It's not even funny. The immune tolerance, these the bioterrorism attacks that happened, just so many other things. So yeah, that's kind of, and there was Alan Steer had also published a paper saying that it was, I think it was some island in Cape Cod or somewhere in Cape Cod that they found cases going back to 1961. So then when you add that up with the newspaper article saying it's just the black-legged tick is a transmitter of disease, and then polymurray, and then we also have, at that time in the late 50s, there was a German researcher who was finding it in MS patients, finding spirochetes in MS patients, and it became this really controversial thing, and everyone started attacking him, like in the academic community. Because it's a campaign to cover up. They didn't want people making this connection. And then, so what do? You make it as politically charged and controversial as possible, and then attack the person and try to discredit him.
And that is the government stepping in under plausible deniability, which was created by an NSC memorandum number 10/2 in 1948 by Harry S. Truman, which enables the CIA and its associates to fool the American people with big lies. And these big lies have covered up all kinds of crimes and all kinds of behavior, not only by our government, but by other governments sending in biological agents to hurt us. And our government, for some reason, doesn't reveal it to the American people. Well, I think that has a lot to do with who's really pulling the strings here in the United States behind the scenes.
John Loftus used to say, yeah, they would often hide scandals in the highest classification. Like they would bury these scandals in with some, like, Nazis, and they would classify it at the highest level.
Folks, the book is The Sleeper Agent by A.W. Finnegan. You can get it on Amazon. You can also go to thesleeperagent.com and ask Adam to send you a personal copy of his book. It's a fantastic read. The thing that we really want you to do is to share this with professionals in the field, with people that are medical doctors or people that in government that really need this information. If we could get Bobby Kennedy to read this book, I think the world might change. We've got to make some progress here for the future of our country and the world to stop these biological warfare strategic weapons. We know a lot about the acute weapons, the tactical weapons. Anthrax is all over the news day in, day out. But when are the media going to pick up this story that has been told so well by Adam Finnegan? Adam, thank you very much for all your great work. I know you're working on some more very good material to reveal to us in the future. All the best to you, and thanks again for joining me here at McDuff Lives today.
Thank you. Have a nice day.
All right, everybody. We'll see you tomorrow with Harley Schlanger. Bye now.